right, my name is Honigford. I don't think you'll have any trouble hearing me. My farm is Hurricane Flats in South Royalton, Vermont. That's a picture of my farm. I guess the top of this got cut off for some reason. I'm not a technology person. I'd rather spend my time figuring out how to fix my tractor. But we make the claim that we're the largest popcorn producer east of the Hudson, which isn't much of a claim, at 1 3/4 acres. I got started small, so if some of you were thinking of getting started small, I can relate to that. I was doing 50, 80 pounds, and then I suddenly said, I'm selling this stuff like hotcakes. I mean, I'd sell it the first day I'd go to farmer's market, sell 80 pounds. And so then I said, well, I'm going to ramp it up. So now this past year we grew 6,000 pounds. I have unlimited market for it. I can sell, right now I can sell 26,000 pounds a year if I could produce it. But there's problems in it, and I'll get to that. But I had some bullet points up there. We employ 1.5 people for seasonal help. We have 11 acres of mixed vegetables we do. We also make hay. And in the popcorn area, we have 1.75 acres, about 6,000 pounds a year. So this will be interesting to see that whole thing came on. So in terms of varieties, I'm going to go through the growing part quick, because that's actually the easiest part of doing popcorn. And you can stop me with a question at any point you want. It doesn't matter to me. But the whites and the yellow popcorns, the ones you find in the store, they're bred to look pretty. That's why people put butter on them. They have no taste, and they're chewy. What I grow is a ruby red. It's hard to find, and it's expensive, but it is the best tasting popcorn we've ever come across. We have a money-back guarantee at the market when we sell it. People say, oh, money back in case it doesn't pop, and I say, no, it'll pop. If it isn't the best tasting popcorn you've ever had, I'll give you your money back. I've had one person in 6 years come back to me and say they want their money back. So it's nutty, crunchy. It doesn't pop big and beautiful. It doesn't have those attributes, but it has taste. And people again and again and again come back and say, hey, I don't even put butter on it. It's so good. We also grow another one called Shaman Blue. It's a bigger pop. It's a bigger popcorn. It's tougher to dry. A lot more yield on it. It has excellent taste, not quite as good as the ruby red, but it's a bigger, fluffier pop, and some people like that. That's even harder seed to acquire. In terms of fertilizer, I have a sandy loam. I'm buying it from Giroux's. I'll use the dry manure. Put about 35 yards per acre. I don't measure it out. It just looks, that looks right. And in some areas I use soy meal. I got flooded by a rain a few years ago, so some areas have deposits, some areas don't. So I manage things differently. I have high phosphorus content on the areas that did not get flooded. So there I'll use soy meal, which comes out to 811, about 700 pounds per acre. I never side dress, ever. I put it on, done. Planting, I'll plant in early May. It can take the colder temperatures. It's not like sweet corn, it won't rot on you. It took me a while to get used to the idea of that I could plant in early May. I do wait for a warm day. I don't plant it in cold temperatures. I'll wait till I get 2 70-degree days in a row, and then I'll put it in the ground. And if you have problems with crows pulling up your corn, especially sweet corn, they don't do it to popcorn. I don't know why. But my sweet corn, I have to keep a row cover on it after I plant it, or they'll pull it all out of the ground. My popcorn, I do nothing and don't have any troubles. I'm now fairly mechanized with everything I do, but again, I can speak to being non-mechanized. That's the way I started. So I use a 2-row corn planter, very simple, no hydraulics. This thing was made in the 60s. You do have to buy a separate, if those of you who are into something like this, you got to mail order a separate plate. It comes out of Nebraska. Weed control. I do zero tolerance on weeds. That means I let no weeds go to seed ever at any point in time. I'm totally anal about it. And what I found, I've been at it for 19 years growing, and every year I weed less than I did the year before. So those of you who are thinking of going to that, I can speak a lot about it. There was a study the University of Maine did a few years ago, and they were looking at how many weed seeds there were in particular areas and how people managed it. And I was part of that study, and I was the lowest by half of anybody else. And so what I find is it was a lot of money, a lot of time up front keeping it weed free, but over the years it gets easier and easier. I try to weed every 10 to 14 days, and that's I'll be weeding with the tractor, but I'll clean up with the scuffle hoe. So every time we weed, we come back through with the scuffle hoe, and it's a nice way to do it because there's always weeds that you miss, and it gives you a chance to kick plants upright that got knocked down by the cultivator. And at the end of the season, we'll actually go out there before the corn's quite mature, and we walk through it, and we'll have baskets, and we'll actually pull out any weeds we missed all year that have a viable weed seed head and carry them out of the field. And if you think about that, if you have one plant that you missed has 10,000 weed seeds, if I just take that, put it in a basket, carry it out, I just pulled 10,000 weeds. Well, it's not quite that simple, but that's the way I like to think about it. This tool is excellent. The picture didn't come out at all. I can see it on my screen. You can't see it on yours. Just Google this at home, rotary hoe. This tool is totally wild to use. It's basically it's spiked teeth, it just rolls across the ground. The first time you use it, it's going to scare the hell out of you because the corn will be about that tall. I'll put it on, and I just go zooming across the top. I don't even care where the corn is. I make no calculation about the corn whatsoever. And it'll rip up all those small weeds, and the corn will remain standing. It'll look a little battered, and you pull one or two out, but for the most part, it survives. And I'll do this until the corn gets about that tall. So I'll wait, another 10 days and just zoom it across again. And I'm flying when I do this. I got dirt. I can't see behind me. It's just nothing but a sea of dirt flying in the air. The first time I did it, I swore to God nothing could survive. But this I used to use. This is basically a flex time weeder. You can see more souped up versions today of the same thing where you can adjust the pressure. I got this for $75. And it's the same thing. You just throw it on, zoom across. I'm not even looking where the corn is. And that'll do it too. In fact, I'm willing to sell this for more than I paid for it. But I'll still sell it fairly cheap. That rotary hoe goes for $500. This one here I'll let go for $150. But this will work too. I don't use it anymore because the one year I had some trouble with the soil got baked so I forget the exact climatary reasons, and this thing just kind of bounced off the top. And so then I got that rotary hoe, and it worked great. So I haven't used this thing in years, but I do recommend something like that. So this is I think this is sweet corn. I just grabbed some slides I have, but I manage it the same. And I've got a different tool going through here. So every time I'm weeding, I use a different tool. Depends on what the conditions are. When the corn gets pretty big, if you use that rotary hoe, you'll just tear it to pieces. You won't tear it out of the ground. You'll just rip it to shreds. So then I go to other tools, and I think this tool hopefully is right there. It is. That one's set up for doing potatoes. But I'll do 2 rows. So I'll have 2 sets of hilling discs, and then the various sweeps behind. And what I'm actually doing is pushing dirt on top of the corn, and I'm burying any weeds between the rows. I spend a lot of time worrying about weeds. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about fertilizer. I find that I don't need to spend any time. I think one of the things I think we like to do as farmers is we like to really think that we really want to control the system. And I found that if I just fertilize it once, that's all I need to do. I don't need to worry about side dressing. I don't do pre-nitrogen tests. This popcorn will grow about 12 feet tall. I can see it looks good. So I think if you just keep it weed-free, you're a long way down the road. I'll also use this kind of cultivator. It's got C-shanks. It's got just some shoes on it. And I can change this in all kinds of angles depending on what's going on. So it depends on what the weed conditions are, what cultivator I use. There's a shot of corn at a little higher stage, and there's my scuffle hoe right there, right next to it.
Question?
Yes, sir.
How big are you?
Oh, that's a great question. My tractor spacing is 6 foot. So they're pretty tight when you think about, I can't tell exactly, I'd have to figure out the math, but I can get that answer to you. But my spacing is tighter than what would be recommended. And they're getting 3,000 pounds per acre yield out in the Midwest, and that's pretty much exactly what I'm getting. So, and that's what they're starting to find now is tighter spacing on corn it can have better yields. So these plants are about 6 inches apart in the row, and those rows are fairly tight together. So it's 2 rows within 6 feet of spacing. And again, the scuffle hoe, we're pretty anal about going through here. This is it's getting fairly mature, and I just took the shot. You can look down through, and you don't see very many weeds in there. And we don't do weeds at all. Then it's picking time. Again, I'm not a photographer. This is a new idea, 1-row corn picker. Interestingly enough, I grew up in a town called Coldwater, Ohio, and that's exactly where this thing was made. It's made in 1953, so I'm using fairly old technology, but it'll pick the ear, it'll drop it into a husking bed, the same machine. There's the husking bed, and that'll rip the husk off it, puts it in an elevator and drops it in a wagon behind the thing. So picking it's easy. I can pick everything 1.75 acres in 2 hours. That's a breeze, as long as the machine doesn't break. But the great thing about using 1953 technology, if the machine breaks, if you're anyway mechanically inclined, you can get it back running pretty quickly. Parts are out there for it. Yeah.
Where did you find your picker?
You can find them. They're very common, especially around Pennsylvania, Ohio. I got lucky. I got this thing for $400. You should expect to pay about $1,200 for one. But there's parts out there that lots of parts are available. It's no problem getting parts on them.
Do you have a particular name of yours?
It's a new idea, 323. Yeah. They have a 2-row picker too. I think it's a 325, I think. Yeah.
Do you get it at the same maturity as sweet corn?
No, I'm glad you asked that question. No, it's out there till November. I pick it. In fact, this year I got trapped. I got behind. I don't know what exactly happened, but it snowed, and I was out there picking it in the snow, and that was not a good situation because my tractor had trouble pulling the picker and a wagon full and going through a foot of snow. It was not a happy situation. I was cursing, but I pick it in stages because I'm trying to dry it in stages, and we can get more into that now. Because the drying this is the problem with popcorn in Vermont. It's right here. So the growing part I kind of glossed over, do it quick. In drying, you need a moisture level between 13 and 14.5 moisture content. If you're serious about doing popcorn, you got to get a moisture tester. Because you can do popcorn and dry it in your greenhouse, hang it in a bag, and then figure out, oh, it's popping now. Well, it could pop at 15.5% moisture content. It'll pop just fine. It won't store. It'll mold. So you'll go into your bin after 6 months and it'll be moldy and you'll say, what the hell? It's because it was too wet. It was wet enough to pop, dry enough to pop, but not wet enough to store. So if you're serious about it, you got to get a moisture tester. Those are, you can get a handheld one for about $400, and that's about as cheap as you can get one. You can corn crib it. I've done that before. It takes about all winter to dry it down. In the Midwest, they're picking it out of the field at about 18% moisture content. I'm picking it above what my moisture tester can read. So it's above 23%. So that's a big challenge. So I've been going to bin drying. I went up to visit Jack Laser, and he told me what he does. It works a lot faster, but there's some problems about uneven drying. I think I got a picture of the bin here. And relative humidity is unbelievably critical on this. If you can get it dry and ready to shell, I'm trying to dry it on the ear. It's 13.5% moisture content, right where I want it, and it's all out in a corn crib outside. I got 5,000 pounds out there, and I start shelling it. Don't get it done one day, and it rains the next day. It's going to be 16.5 moisture percent. You can't shell it. It takes you another 3 days to dry it back to where you need to be. So one rain can do a world of hurt to you. So it'll bop up and down, and if you try to dry it, if you're using fans to dry it, and it's raining outside, you're just pumping moisture back into your popcorn. So you really have to. I got charts now that I have about, and I've humidistats, so my fans go off if there's too much humidity in the air. So if I'm not there and I can't shut it off. There's a corn crib that I built. If you're going to build a corn crib, it will work, but don't make it beyond 5 feet wide. You won't dry it. This here's my bin dryer that I built in the side of the barn. I built a dormer up there. I think I got a picture. Oops, there we are loading it out of the gravity wagon there. That's the bin dryer. I don't have a pointer there, but you see the plywood in the background. So that holds about 5,000 pounds. And I can tell you how Jack Laser built this and how I built mine. The problem is that it's high at the top of the bin. It'll be about 15% moisture content. At the bottom of the bin, it'll be about 12%. It'll be over dry. So when I shell it, I actually have to take a reading about every 80 pounds and blend it. So I blend it so it averages out to about 13.5, 14% moisture content. And then once it's in a barrel, it'll even itself out. The stuff that was 12 will become 13.5, and the stuff that was 15 will become 13.5. And that will work, and you won't notice a popping difference. Yes, sir?
What's the consequence of over-drying?
Over-drying, it won't pop. You can get the pop back by adding water. But it's a bastard of an operation to do, because if you got a 5-gallon bucket full of popcorn and you put in a tablespoon, as you might imagine, you shake it up, some of the water still goes to the bottom, and that will mold unless you keep flipping it constantly. So I can't, with 6,000 pounds, if I over-dry, I'm screwed. I have no effective way to get moisture back in it. But if you're at home doing this, you can get moisture back in it and it will pop.
So putting, like you said, you put moisture corn with over-dried corn, that works to some extent?
Yep, it will work. It'll work just fine.
Okay.
It'll even itself out within the bin, given enough time. I don't exactly know how much time it takes. But when I open those things up after 3 months, any reading in that thing is exactly the same from top to bottom.
So is that different than what you just said that you can't, is that a different staging?
No, if I over-dry it, say I over-dry that whole load in there, I dry it to all 12%, I'm screwed, because I can't open up a 400-pound barrel of popcorn and pour a cup of water in and turn it over. I can't do it. So I don't over-dry it. Yes, ma'am.
How much space do you need between popcorn and other kinds of corn, like sweet or
I have none.
So,
I don't even worry about it. I used to worry about it, and now I found out it doesn't matter. There's
farm next door has like some other kind of corn with popcorn.
It's more likely to cross with a dent corn, a field corn. But there are some popcorns that will cross with the sweet corn. They often tell you that in the seed catalog. But the sweet corn I grow doesn't cross, so I don't. They actually pollinate at different times. The Shaman Blue is behind it, so I can plant them at the same time and they won't cross-pollinate. But that's a good question. Yeah, they would if they pollinate at the same time.
So is that bin just like a plywood box?
It's a plywood box. I can tell you how to make it. You actually need the grain drying floor in the bottom. It's like a hot air furnace that I'm blowing air in the bottom, and there's a plenum. And that's working its way up through the floor and then up through the top. And I put a salamander heater on it to give it about 25 degrees difference in warming, and that makes a huge difference. Yes, sir? Seeds. That Ruby Red comes from an outfit out in Minnesota called Jordan, and so does the Shaman Blue. But I noticed Jordan didn't have any Shaman Blue this year. None was available. But I had some left over from last year. So again, I'm using the elevator there. You can see it coming up. I don't have a pointer. You can see it coming up from the bin. It's dropping in a sheller. They haven't made these things, there it is, since the 1960s. A PTO sheller. They're all built into combines now, the same kind of unit. But this was a standalone model. I got it out in the Midwest, out in Ohio. And it works slick. I mean, I got a sheller that you drop an ear in at a time and it shells it. But, I grow 30, I forget how many I figured out once, 36,000, 50,000 ears of corn. To drop them in one at a time is agonizing. This thing will chew up about 5 at a time. So I can rip through that whole 1,500-pound bin. If I didn't have to check the moisture content all the time, I could rip through that whole bin in an hour. And it's just, as you can see, cobs are all over the place, popcorn's everywhere. It just chews the thing up.
What machine is that?
That's a John Deere. It's a 48 corn sheller. And I'll stick around afterwards. I can tell you how I access some of this stuff, because it was a pickle, even figuring out this stuff exists and then how to get it. And it has a fan attached, and that's just blowing out all the chaff and husks out one area because it doesn't husk all of them. I put in little food-grade storage bins. If I get any bigger than this, I won't use this system. I'll be going to using some kind of industrial bin to store it in. And I'm marking the moisture content on those because sometimes I'll have batches that I didn't quite dry enough, and I mark the moisture content, and then when I dry down the next batch, I'll mix that in.
How big are those?
These things, this particular one holds about 125 pounds. I have some barrels I use that hold about 400. It's a real wrestling job for me to control them. And you can see it's pretty dirty. Not with field dirt, not sand or anything, but it's got pieces of cob and things like that. So then it's the next stage of the operation. I'm putting it through a clipper. This actually belonged to my grandfather. And I goosed this up a little bit because the fan in here didn't do a very good job of taking out the small pieces of cob. And so I went to the local hardware store where they rent the little bouncy houses. And I said, do you guys have any of those? Where do I get a fan like that? And they go, well, the bouncy houses get ruined, but we still have the fans. We'll sell you one of those for $50. So this thing kicks out a hell of a lot of air. And so I took off the fan that came with the clipper, and I just stick this in, and it just honks. And so the kernels, it won't blow out the kernels, but it'll blow out the cobs. So cleaning issues, the more aggressive the sheller you have, the bigger pieces of cob you're going to have that need to be removed. You need more air to do that. And there's little wings on the popcorn. And I was really worried when I started selling it that people were going to complain about the wings. Because when you buy it in the store, there's no little wings that come floating up when you empty out the popcorn bag. People don't even mention it. And I've been at this scale now of selling thousands of pounds a year, and not a single person has ever said, what about these wings? So I don't worry about them anymore. Marketing's easy. I can sell everything. It's not an issue. I can talk more about that later, but it's easy to sell. Just a quick budget look. I'm running out of time here. I have about $8,000 in equipment just for making popcorn. That's all it does is popcorn stuff for me. It costs about $1.60 a pound to grow. I'm selling it for about $2.25 a pound, so I'm making 65 cents on every pound, and that pays for my time, that pays for everything. So I'm making about 29% profit margin, it's a pretty decent rate. If you're breaking it down by the hour, I use this $20 an hour base pay rate. So it means every hour that me or somebody else is working on my popcorn operation, I made $16.25. So it can be very profitable. And a lot of the cleaning and shelling work all comes in the winter when I'm a little lighter. And I guess that's it. So I got time for maybe one question or two, and you can nail me afterwards and I'll answer anything you want.
Is there any reason you couldn't keep it dried on the cob and not take it off?
This particular popcorn, if you try to pop it on the cob, put it in the microwave, it won't detach. It'll just be, you have to be a squirrel to eat it. I mean, but it will pop on the cob. It'll just be one big boom. Yeah, it'll do it. Anyway, just nail me afterwards. I'll sit around. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.